new book event from AIGA and Phaidon. Today we have Jane Hall on Women Made Great Women Designers. And that's the book right here. And you can get the book yourselves in a couple weeks, or you can pre-order. I'll tell you more about it. Yay, Jane, she's got her book as well. Today, we'll be discovering the fascinating stories of trailblazing women product designers from about 1900 through present days, over 200 women total. And in the book, author Jane Hall reveals the stories behind the designers, from lesser-known figures, including a number of unsung heroes of the Wiener Werkstätte and the Bauhaus school, to icons and pioneers from the past 100+ years. About our author today, Jane Hall is the inaugural recipient of the British Council Lena Bo-Bardi Fellowship in 2013 and a founding member of Assemble, the London-based Turner Prize-winning collective. Jane's own projects within the collective focus on collaborative practice between artists and architects, explored through exploratory installation and exhibition. She is the author of Breaking Ground, Architecture by Women, published by Phaidon in 2019, as well as her latest book, which we're here to talk about today, Women Made Great Women Designers, also published by Phaidon this year, 2021. So you can get the book now if you're outside of North America, order on Phaidon.com. If you are in the US or Canada, you can pre-order on Phaidon.com, but officially, the sales will start on October 13th. And for folks who are AIGA members or just anybody tuning into this webinar today, use code AIGA20 for 20% off when you purchase Women Made on the Phaidon website. And it's also valid for other Phaidon books as well, with some exceptions. So thanks again for coming. And Jane, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for the invitation, audience read. I'm in London. It's kind of grey and miserable and late afternoon, so I hope everyone's in slightly better circumstances the other side of the Atlantic.
We have similar weather right now here in England as it is in Old England, so I feel a connection to you, even though we're an Atlantic Ocean apart. So what we wanted to do is start with a few images from the book and stories behind some of the 200+ designers. Obviously, we only have a selection of about 10 today, just to give you all a taste of the book and the stories within it. And we'll also talk about the process, Jane's process for curating these designer stories. And then we'll also open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you can post in the Q&A pod here on Zoom. If you're on one of our live streams, like on LinkedIn, you can post in the comments there too. Our staff will be monitoring those for later on. All right. So here's just a close-up of the book. I held it up. It's going to be hard to see, but you can see the real life book. The color is a bit more saturated maybe than what it shows up in some of the photos. Why don't we start with just the cover itself? Not to judge a book by its cover, but Jane, could you tell us a little bit about the story behind this cover design?
Yeah, so the graphic designer is Ariane Spanier, who is, I think, Berlin-based, and actually authors. Well, my relationship with Phaidon has been they actually kind of choose a graphic designer and really lead with it. So it's always been a bit surprised for me. I've been so into research, and then suddenly this design that kind of represents the content is put in front of you. But I think what's really kind of striking about it is, and I think Ariane's really known for the simplicity and the strength of the font. And I think what's really great about this cover is the kind of formal shape, the kind of hint of a sort of chair that you get made out of the font. And it's a kind of, you probably can't really tell in the picture, but it's a sort of mint green leatherette thing going on. So it's got a nice texture to it as well. And I think we'll see some of the spreads internally, but this kind of identity is definitely consistent sort of throughout, which I think really unifies such a broad history that's kind of captured within.
Yeah. Let's talk about the chair. We'll look at some actual chairs in a little bit. There is something significant that you write about just the design of chairs, right? They're kind of everywhere. We need them. But what is the significance of chairs for you in design?
Well, actually, it's quite funny. I was doing all the research and communicating with Phaidon, and they were like, "Oh, we need to find some other things and not just chairs." Because they're more look on chairs, and chairs just have this, I think, amazing quality that lots of other bits of furniture don't quite have. And Jane Dillon, who's one of the British designers featured, who what her chair is that's featured is from the late 60s. And she describes the chair as an immutable object, one that really signifies a kind of is a patriarchal symbol, the throne, the big chair, a thing that you don't often move. That sounds new, but yet other than like the bed and a few other bits of furniture, it's the one piece that you have a real tactile relationship to. Your whole body is within the chair. And so I think there's a great history of sort of just chairs in themselves. But I think Dillon's kind of framing of what the chair means in the history of design was really interesting. And I know it's not one of the images you have, but I might be able to quickly find it for the audience. Yeah, actually, I'm not going to be too speaking at this kind of thing here.
There we go.
This is Jane Dillon, and she did this as a student, and it was put into production by Panula, and she was supported by Tori Sotsas when she worked with him in Italy in the late 60s. And, it's a time where there were new dyes available and new colours. And so a lot of the chairs, particularly from that period, are really playing with a lot of new things, which is quite exciting. It's amazing how much invent the chair, you think it's done. But
yeah, it's almost one of those like industrial design school kind of cliches of designing a chair, but there's just, I think it's an assignment for a reason, right? Because there's so much you can do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, let's click through some of these other images from the book. Let's see if this will move for us. Okay, let's start with, this is Aino Alto.
Aino Alto, yeah, Finnish designer. So I don't know whether the Altos must be well known in North America. What I found with a lot of designers is a background in architecture. And so Alto was a kind of early modernist, worked with Alvar Aalto, who was her kind of husband, but she was in fact older than him, and graduated before him. But she ended up in his office, and then they set up a design company called Kahula, and she was the kind of creative director right up until her death. And this is actually a glass piece that she won awards for, and they would actually, as a couple, enter the same prizes but with separate entries. So they had this moment of competition. So she was very much a very well-established designer in her own right. And this particular set, which is still in production, is based on a kind of ripple of a pebble in water, which I think once you hear that, you can suddenly just see it in the glassware. And there are a lot of people in the book. A lot of the glassware is actually by Finns, by Scandinavians. And so there's this amazing history where, some companies would have the four main designers were women, at a kind of time in the middle of the 20th century when there weren't so many women in design. Glassware seems to really be a place where that opened up for a lot of people. And Alto was one of them.
Yeah, I learned from the book too that Finland was one of the first countries that allowed women to become architects and designers, right? So that's another one of the reasons why they were maybe ahead of the curve in terms of representation.
Yeah, interior design, industrial design a bit earlier, but interior design, product design, and even furniture design are really actually very recent inventions, and that pretty much all of the women in the book studied architecture. And often there are other designers, such as the Danish designer Bodil Kaja, who, she was designing social housing, and or Marguerite Zotsky, who designed the Frankfurt kitchen. Actually their main role was designing new spaces, but then they'd have to furnish them with 19th century phony chairs and things. So they were looking for creating furniture that spoke to the spaces that they were trying to design. And I spoke to a lot of designers during this process, and pretty much everyone speaks about furniture design as a spatial discipline. It's never object-based, even though that's very much how the book is presented, but these objects have a relationship to other objects and the space they're in. And that was a real kind of theme that I think unites everyone in the book from up to the present day, which was really interesting to kind of discover.
Yeah. Another one of the sub-themes that I'd love to explore a little bit before we move on is in addition to I Know Dillon, there's some other famous women designers in the book who were also associated with their husbands or creative collaborators with their husbands. We have Ray Eames in the book as well. And there was a story from the book as well, where you talk about how Ray Eames was actually left off of a press release for an award, I believe, that she won together with Charles, but somehow he got the credit for it, at least publicly. Can you tell us about some of those challenges of sexism and women maybe often being lesser known than their husbands, even if they were actually equal creative partners in the studio?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting intersection of that kind of personal dynamic within the couple. I think Charles didn't necessarily help Ray to have as much visibility as she deserved, even though I think they had a very equitable working relationship. I mean, there's an amazing clip that I'm sure you can find quite easily on YouTube where both of them are on TV, and then they interview Charles and they sort of turn to Ray and they're like, "So Ray, how do you support your husband with his work?"
Yes. Right. That didn't age well.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely true. But in a lot of couples, I think a lot of the women actually found they had very successful careers during their lifetimes with their husband, and they themselves had an equitable balance in terms of what output that they produced at the time that might not have been received so equitably. I think Ico and Luisa Parisi are a really interesting Italian couple where, Ico Parisi is up there as one of the kind of geniuses. Frank Cahell also had some issues. There's loads of examples, but in reality, it's actually the historicization that has led to us overlooking them or not seeing them. And I think that's why books like this are really important, because there are so many conscious and unconscious biases, which mean that women will always get lost. So I think the couples is really interesting because, if anything, they're the women who had their best shot because they were close proximity, yet the man they were associated with, and actually maybe that's why it was to their detriment, becomes the more visible one. So for me, a lot of my favorites are the Italians, Cini Boeri and Nanda Vigo, who were the kind of first women working really independently in the post-war period, who really made a name for themselves by themselves. But yeah, the kind of, I think Leila Vanelli is one of the great ones who's kind of in a partnership, and there's some really nice stories of how people work together throughout the biographies in the book.
I just want to tell the audience we've been sharing mostly European and American examples so far, but the book actually does feature designers from Africa, Asia, Australia, Latin America as well. So we'll get to some of these in.
Okay.
All right. What are we looking at here?
Oh wow! This is better. This one's a bit of a weird kind of not a mystery, but Lissy was and I might get her name, actually her surname, confused with a different, Lissy Beckman, yes. So Lissy Beckman, it is almost impossible to find anything on this designer. And this is what I found. There are 200-word biographies in the book for each designer. But in some instances, it's like they sort of never existed. And really, this is the kind of Lissy Beckman had kind of this one incredible design. This one, which is called Corellia, which was inspired by an area also of Finland where she grew up, and she apparently could recite this kind of epic poem about the area and the kind of sculptural nature of it. It's sort of supposed to mimic the landscape, but Lissy Beckman kind of I think she had her career in Italy and she worked for other people, she never had her own distinct practice. I think there were designs like this one here and there, a bit like Jane Dillon, the example I talked about earlier. And then she retired and took up painting. And so her work hasn't been maybe as well collected or as well received. But this particular one, I think, is in the Helsinki Design Museum. And so it's the one that is the most kind of visible and the most obvious. And it sounds like Beckman was someone who really was kind of complete craftswoman. She studied design, but she also tried to do like art classes, and she was very much involved in lots of different disciplines, and then became a painter later in life. But I often get this one confused with Berger, with Susie Berger, who did these ones. And the Bergers are a really fun Swiss couple. It's actually what I found is that, countries that you think like stereotypically are going to produce some particular type of design. The Swiss in this book do the maddest stuff. You think they're going to be really austere, but actually it's the Swiss that do the crazy stuff.
Yeah. That's great to see some of these examples that are breaking stereotypes as well, both of national stereotypes as well as, I guess, gender stereotypes, right? Like, is there even, I think maybe this is even a problematic question, but like, is there a sort of like woman designed style, right? And I think part of this book is saying like, no, there's as many styles as there are designers.
Yeah, I think at the very kind of, at the starting point, this is just a book of incredible design, which actually many people will be aware of a lot of the designs. And it's more about kind of reattribution of authorship, or even kind of second take. Like, oh, I didn't realize that was designed by, a woman, but that it just brings together almost this kind of slightly lost or overlooked history of design. I have actually behind me Design of the 20th Century and Design the Whole Story, 2 books I looked at when I was researching. And, they're mainstream publications and whatever, but I think, they claim to be the whole story of design. I think that book's got 5 women in it, and it's got like 500 designers. And, so there's a lot missing of just good design. And hopefully this book kind of reinserts a few names, but also a few great work kind of back into that canon.
I think there's some real patriarchal hubris behind naming something the whole history of design there. So I'm just trying to it's like I couldn't keep it in anymore. Before we move on from Beckman, I am curious, your process for this. How do you even narrow it down to 200, which is already a tremendous number, especially for folks like Beckman who are maybe less well documented in the canon?
Well, it was also really interesting for me. My background's in architecture, and I'd already done a book with Phaidon about same idea, but with architects. And so I was aware of a lot of people who are kind of that crossover, like Lina Bobardi or Charlotte Perriand, all these people who are known for both their furniture design and their architecture. And so in a way that was the kind of starting point. And actually, the process became about, really useful tools, archives, magazines, exhibitions, looking at women associated with the famous men. That's how you kind of uncover the lost people, but also oral history. So I'm speaking to people, speaking to design historians, speaking to designers, and just learning more who they found was significant within certain contexts. And so I think someone like Nathalie Beckman is really interesting because she always only had this one design. And actually, she shares a page with Dorothy Becker, another Swiss designer who, Dorothy only really had this one design as well. And her husband was very famous furniture manufacturer and designer. And so the book captures people who, actually only had one thing, but it also who, ran huge manufacturing companies and who designed endless things. So the book became a sort of balance of really focusing on the works themselves as much as the biographies, so that it wasn't just going to be a kind of familiar tale of all of the well-known people. So lots of people in there for lots of different reasons. So it's quite interesting. Bit of color.
Yeah, a bit of color. What are we seeing here? These are organized alphabetically, by the way.
Just I can easily. Oh, good. Yeah, because there's like 200 people. This is Hedwig Bauhagen, who actually became like a bit of a favorite. She's a ceramicist. This is a watering can. And actually, her stuff I found actually really late and quite randomly. And was really attracted to these amazing, actually like black and white, quite graphic works that she did. But also, her company is still running, although she died in 2001. In fact, her life is really the 20th century. And a bit like Charlotte Perriand, who was born in 1903 and died in 1999. There are some women who just perfectly kind of fit that time frame, almost the kind of early modern right through to the, postmodern. And I think Bauhagen had a really interesting life. She actually took over the running of a company that had been closed down by the National Socialist Party, the Nazis. They'd forced out Marguerite Lobenstein, who is also in the book, who was a ceramicist who had to kind of flee Germany. And it's a bit of a contested history. I think her company sort of refute any alliances with the Nazi Party, but Hedwig was certainly allowed to take over this ceramics company and run it in the, kind of during the Second World War. But she also, she was, I don't know if I wrote it in the thing, she had a close relationship to an artist called Charles Crodel, who was deemed the degenerate artist. But she also was told by the Nazis she couldn't use the color black because it was seen as degenerate, and all of her stuff was like this black and white graphic stuff. So I think there's a much more interesting way in which Bauhagen worked with and played with politics. And you see a lot of the women in the book having to survive, really, especially when they're working by themselves. Eva Seitzel spent 4 years in prison. Margaret Schüttler-Slotsky also spent several years in prison. A lot of these women didn't have easy lives, and they were really pioneering and creating new forms, new styles, experimenting with materials. It's kind of amazing, this kind of energy, which I think is something to be really inspired by. And so this is, I think, this one was from 1955, but this is still in production. And Bauhagen, as a ceramics manufacturer, is still trading. So I'd look up her stuff. It's really great. And she obviously was really talented. She was in charge of an entire painting shop of painting girls, another ceramics factory, which she herself was just a teenager. So she appears to be a very skilled maker, but also a very skilled businesswoman. Sorry for the siren.
No worries. Why don't I forward on to the next slide here? All right, this is just the following page with Marianne Brandt.
Yeah. So Marianne Brandt, and I think Marianne Brandt really represents in a way, in part, the sort of story of the Bauhaus. The main issue with this book is it could have just been a book of women from the Bauhaus. Because there are so many, and they're also very incredible. And Brandt was one, I think, of the people who quite overlooked, because unlike a lot of them who were able to escape or were brought over to America by Walter Gropius, Brandt was in East Germany. I think she returned to her hometown for family reasons, and she got caught there. And so her career was very short-lived because she wasn't able to practice after that. And she kind of has this real heyday in the kind of 30s and then kind of dives off a cliff. But what is frustrating about the format of the book is that it's kind of like one product everyone's described that way, which is great. But there are these incredible photos of Marion Brand dressed up for parties at the Bauhaus, wearing all of this metal jewelry, like huge spear. She had a like necklace with a huge spear on it. And so much of their social lives and this place of exploration and expression found itself into the commercial work and into the design. And so design of this period really speaks to this kind of whole new way of relating to others and relating to the world. And then you see it in these commercial products, and also being, a kind of amazing metal worker, which I think wasn't the obvious route for women at the Bauhaus. They were encouraged into the weaving department and those kind of roles. And you still have Gunther Stossel in the book, the well-known weaver, and some other amazing women who were at the Bauhaus in that capacity. But I think Brandt is, I have to check, but I think Brandt's the only metal worker from the Bauhaus who's in the book. So yeah, I mean, the Bauhaus is just a whole other topic, really.
Yeah. I'm looking at the fact sheet for the book right now. You mentioned like the only metal worker, but we have ceramicists, furniture designers, lighting designers, product designers, toy designers, as well as textiles. So it is a real range of design disciplines there.
Yeah, and we tried to choose, or at least I tried to put forward the Bauhaus designers who you don't see elsewhere so often. The ones, there's a huge number who died in Auschwitz, who didn't survive the war, but had incredibly successful careers before. So Friedel Dicker-Brandeis is the one who did the children's furniture stuff. And she actually smuggled 5,000 drawings out of the ghetto that had been done by children, because she taught kind of art for children. And she died at Auschwitz, but she managed to get the drawings out as this kind of thing that's kind of survives her. So that there's that sort of history as well within this this bit.
Yeah, it really is like world history through the
it's just condensed.
Yeah. And so this is Anna Castelli Ferrieri. Can you tell us about this work?
So I suppose sort of catapulting forward a couple of decades, there's this interesting thing around material innovation, and Castelli Ferrieri really started to use plastics in a really innovative way. Because this is ABS plastic injection molding, and this product, I think it's called the Componibili modular storage system. I had to learn, not that that's necessarily very Italian, but like whole new languages for this. This is still in production. She set up Cartel with her husband, which is a well-known manufacturer, and she was the director she had a particular role, the design director, but, she was really instrumental in giving other designers like Joe Colombo, these really well-known people. It was Anna Castelli Ferrieri who gave them that platform, saw something in them and brought them to Cartel. So whilst you see women as great designers, you also see women throughout the 20th century in these really important roles in defining what great design was at the time. And I think, someone like Mette Hay is really significant now, as, Hay is this huge company in Denmark, and women putting forward other women as well. And plastic is, I think, it's interesting because it's not a product material we'd necessarily like elevate today. But there was this moment where I think the kind of ideas around innovation and materials, something that women really kind of took on. And you probably don't, I'll find it really quick because they're just so fun. The toy designers was something that I hadn't really thought about that much before, whilst doing the book, and then just found so many. So there's Boosty Clover was also someone who did a lot of cool stuff with plastic, and she made all these toys, and
that cool looking elephant.
Yeah, and it's all plastic, but she made that in 1969, so it was kind of its time. But she had she had 9 patents to her name. 3 were actually patented, but she had put forward 9 patents. So, women were really inventors, especially the kind of post-war period. And you see especially a lot in the 20s, women exploring things with metals. So the American industrial designer Belle Kogan, Helena Hughes Delaney, all these women who were patenting their designs, really innovators.
No.
So yeah.
It's a great point about these designers being products of their times as well, whether it's embracing plastic or things that maybe we wouldn't view in the same way today. Were there more contemporary designers that you found in your research that perhaps were embracing more sustainability or some of the things that are more topics today?
Yeah, I think what I was really struck by mainly is the return to craft. Mm-hmm. So women are really interested, actually, like a lot of designers, I think, thinking about modern forms of make something commercial, but returning to that kind of slower craft-based process, which always requires a more sustainable approach to materials, labor practices. In terms of a lot of material innovation, there's some really interesting stuff around other types of plastic, so PLA plastics, and some designers doing some quite quirky stuff. Ilaria Bianchi, who's an Italian designer in the book, makes all of her pieces out of found materials and repurposing and recycling. There wasn't as much material innovation on the kind of commercial scales I was expecting there would be, but a lot is happening in a kind of more artistic practice or creating kind of one-off pieces. And Jade Song-oh, Jade Say-oh, who we're going to see as well, all of these images, approaches that in a very conceptual way.
I think we're there yet, but I think
we're not there. We'll get there. Greta Grossman, who, I was reflecting on it. Greta Grossman is, I just think she's so cool. You know, these people that I just sort of so in awe of. Let me just double check. I think she trained she trained as she had a successful studio in Stockholm. And I think she worked, although it's not in my biography I wrote, but she worked as she had a really hands-on experience in a carpentry studio, but she moved to Los Angeles and really became this kind of lifestyle brand, maybe before you could say that sort of thing existed. So she herself was very sociable, very elegant. Her designs, you can kind of totally see it, this sort of simplicity. And she was well known at her Beverly Hills kind of home and showroom to host people like Frank Sinatra and Greta Garbo, and her pictures of her house, it'll kind of look like amazing, you know, it's a sort of dream situation. And you see a lot of European designers at this time. So this is 1947. This design, the Grasshopper floor lamp. I'm just seeing if I can. She moved in the 30s, I think, but she was one of those people who was a great maker, great designer, and she really understood how to design because of her knowledge of making, but she also understood how to sell and how to really kind of create a whole, come back to this idea of it's a spatial thing, create a whole kind of world for her objects. So
that's
really cool stuff.
That's good. I could really see the grasshopper now, you can see the title.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of the designs I love the most in this book are the ones that have this kind of animist quality. I was really surprised at how playful and humorous so much of the design is that women have kind of created.
Nick Grossman also is a great example of a figure that helps us connect the lines between what was happening in Scandinavia and Northern Europe and what became this California design aesthetic, right, through these patterns of immigration and how they bring these practices and designs to California.
Yeah. No, I think those stories are really kind of important because in a way, so much of design is always like prefaced with nationality, like the kind of modern idea of the nation state, like British design, American design. And actually, designers then were traveling in part because of the situation of the Second World War, but in a more kind of contemporary situation for education. So you have these amazing stories of women and other designers, you know, from one country studying another, going to find work in another country, returning back for a while, and actually can't quite limit those categorizations, especially in terms of aesthetics. So it's interesting, as you say, Greta Grossman, Scandinavian, has defined Californian design.
All right, let's see what's next.
Rosanna Hugh. So Rosanna Hugh is actually someone who it would have been really nice to. I spoke to every designer who's kind of living, who's in the book. I really tried to reach out to, and I think to Rosanna Hugh was someone who I didn't really manage to, but in a way, she's an architect. Her and her husband, Lyndon Neri, they studied in America. They're Chinese, but they studied in America with Michael. Well, they studied and then they worked for Michael Graves, very well-known architect. And they actually set up a company in Shanghai to sell furniture. So they've become very well known for both architecture and furniture design, but kind of quite separately. And this was an interesting project because it's also done in collaboration with a Spanish manufacturer. So the color, the blue, is something that they talk about as being contextual. And then the textile, this kind of extended back, being a nod to the manufacturer who's known mainly as a textile brand. So I think it's also really interesting that a lot of designers, like architects, they don't just go out and make their stuff. They have to work with big brands and manufacturers who can create these products and really develop them. So it's always collaboration between lots of kind of intersecting people. And so this is a sort of Chinese, Spanish kind of mashup. Yeah.
I know we're looking at time. We'll kind of go a little bit quickly through some of these. But for the audience, feel free to type into the Q&A if you have any questions. I'll read them in as we go along. I think just showing these examples is just a way to help structure our conversation about exploring more broadly. But this one looks really fun too.
Sure, this is American Monling Lee, who actually I think has quite an international background. So I think she studied in the UK and is Taiwanese, I must say. But her studio, Jumbo, is New York based. And this is actually one of the only products that I found that explicitly was prefaced with it was made during lockdown. So this is very new.
Oh, wow.
And it's a whole series. I think it's called, I want to say, and I am just remembering this, it's called Creature Comforts. And it's a whole series. And actually the product I chose was this super hairy looking lamp. It's wild. And then this kind of sofa chair thing got put in. But Jumbo are interesting because it's actually the kind of antithesis of what I was just saying about designers being interested in craft and traditional forms of making, because Jumbo really try and dematerialize their work. And so, there are minimal scenes. It's very hard to understand the scale of this if you didn't know it was a seat, for example.
Yeah. Because it could be just like finger size too. Really.
Colors are like acidic. They've done a lot of stuff in metalwork that doesn't have, it's really unusual and hard to kind of understand. It was one of the main designers, which I really feel like there's no precedent for, there's no history.
Yeah.
So nothing that comes before. And I just thought they were just totally new, and I can't even remember how I found monoliney and jumbo.
Did you find them on Instagram? Because you write about their hugely popular
No,
Instagram.
No, I found that afterwards. And actually, Monling Lee, she makes clothes and posts on her Instagram, and they're very cool. She's a very talented maker as well. But no, I didn't. And they were actually, it was Jumbo who, during the research, I got really excited about contemporary design, because you have all of the greats, and in the past, there's so much great stuff that happened. But it was when I saw Jumbo's work that I was like, oh, there's some really cool things happening now. As well. So yeah, color index is, as it says in the chat. Yeah, this one. It's yeah, I think there's a few. So this one's interesting because this is past and present. This is Mira Nakashima, and her father is George Nakashima, who, I mean, I wonder whether, speaking to a North American audience, or George Nakashima is a well-known name. It wasn't to me, but in the research, George Nakashima is a kind of incredible woodworker. Worked in Japan for the Raymond. Noemi Raymond is in the book, to an American couple who built over 300 buildings in Japan. And George Nakashima worked for them on a load of projects and returned to the US. I think he was interned in a camp there during the war, but afterwards made a very successful career in woodwork. And his daughter Mira has taken over his workshop. Since the early 90s, actually. So for a very long time, is herself kind of reshaped the company to be maybe like less austere than her father.
Yeah.
But still, you know, everything's very particular, very refined, and it's really love of the material. And this particular piece, I think, was for an orchestra, so you can sit upright but still have, you know, able to move and, you know, play the cello or whatever.
And a little bit of support.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting, because actually, like, lots of her stuff responds so much to the material that they're usually one-off pieces for private clients. So I think this is like one of the pieces that is actually a multiple, where many were made for a kind of a group. And her, I mean, the photos of the workshop just look incredible. It's like one of the places I'd love to visit, kind of in a forest.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point too, because there's limited space in a book. I hope that for readers, it's like an invitation to learn more about these designers and dig into these images that you couldn't show in the book, right? Like what the workshop looks like. And
yeah, exactly. And yeah, the context in which the stuff is made is really important.
This one is pretty mysterious.
Yeah. This is, oh God, I'm going to forget how to pronounce her name. Say, oh, did I get that right? Yeah. And she's South Korean designer who studied at Cranbrook. And apparently this piece is loads of waste. So she was kind of observing how much waste there was put outside on the campus at Cranbrook in dumpsters. And she started wrapping it in jute. And so this is a kind of much more refined version, but it's sort of this idea of the sofa, the idea of something that we know well, completely reconfigured and rethought of using new construction and new materials. And so I think her practice is interesting because it's still this intersection of art and design. So it was also quite a difficult choice about whether things were art or design. You know, should they be in a book about furniture when, like, it's unclear whether you can even sit on it or not. And I'd love to see one of these in person. You know, that would be.
Yeah, it's like, does it belong in a showroom or in a living room or?
Yeah.
And it's kind of.
Yeah, and actually, I think at the beginning it became, you know, should you have products? So much of design at this level is inaccessible. Even the stuff that was designed for mass production or in the kind of early post-war period had the ambitions of being affordable, but often for various reasons never became affordable. And it's kind of a bit like fashion. You see these extraordinary, innovative pieces and it trickles down. into what you see every day. And the book very quickly just became kind of capturing everything. It's kind of like what has the world of chair design or sofas inspired, and then you kind of end up with pieces like this. Yeah.
Let's take an audience question, actually. Raj in the chat was asking, are there any other books, talks, or podcasts that you would recommend that also cover the impact of women in the history of design?
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe I should type it in the chat so people can. There's another book by someone called Libby Sellers called Women Design, which is it's only got like 20 people in it, but has much longer biographies. So it's quite nice book, and it's framed really nicely. And that was a really useful, interesting book. And Libby's done a lot of work on Günter Stolzel as well, the Bauhaus designer. And then I don't know if you have, you guys know Alice Rawsthorne. She was the director of the Design Museum a long time ago. She's a curator and author. She wrote a book called Design as Attitude, I want to say. But she has a really interesting, it's not a podcast, but it's like a YouTube. She does YouTube channels or through Instagram. I'm an elder millennial. I'm not sure how all this stuff works exactly, but it's called Design Emergency with Paola Antonelli, and they'll do talks, and it's really about, design today. And I think a lot of it comes from the climate crisis or from designing for disability or designing for other issues. So it contextualizes the significance of design. There's a exhibition, the name of which I forget, but it's at the Vitra Museum in Germany that's just opened, and I think they're featuring a whole load of people, women designers. So it's worth checking out their website. And I mean, Instagram. There are just so many groups who are talking about design, and especially from a kind of intersectional lens. In the UK, we have Design Can, and of course, there's the book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, which is much broader, but it talks about and frames design as something that is gendered, and the way in which women kind of benefit or actually don't due to design. And that's just such an interesting book, because I think the idea about this type of research and the point of foregrounding women designers is about talking about a kind of feminist methodology or an approach to design, which isn't not just, for no reason, kind of bringing women together, but talking about ways we might look elsewhere for other types of people that are in the world. So I mean, that would be my rundown. Although if anyone has any recommendation for themselves, I would love to see if you put them in the chat. If there's anything anyone's come across that they would recommend as well, that would be great.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. I'm sure maybe our audience members have some as well. I also looked at our slides. It looks like the piece by the sofa was the last image. So I turned off the slide share there. And I guess to wrap things up, Jane, what sort of takeaways do you want readers to take away from the book, or maybe just one of the top messages that you want readers to get out of this?
I think that with projects like this, it's about really making more visible a kind of lost history, or I suppose giving certain designers a platform that they deserve, that they may not have had before. And I think something else that we were talking about earlier, just before this began, but this book particularly looks much wider geographically than most other publications of its kind. And that was really important because design, as it has emerged, is a very Western discipline and Western concept. And as I kind of just mentioned, there's this amazing transnationality that's actually always been there. And there are whole new locations for design, especially in Dubai, Kuwait. I was talking to designers in the morning. I would be like in China, and then I'd be in Kuwait, and then Dubai, and then Italy, and then Russia. It's just this kind of amazing global thing. So I'd really like people to look further afield than maybe the obvious spaces for where they're kind of receiving or understanding where design comes from. And design is this cultural practice, right, that really represents people. And also, I think it's just a great book of design, something that hopefully can be shared with and brings men into the conversation and people of other genders as well. So, I don't know if they're big asks or just kind of obvious.
Yeah. It looks great on your bookshelf or on your coffee table. For me, I felt because it was so comprehensive, at least in terms of time span, it really did give us new perspectives on these major world events, whether it was the designers who perished at Auschwitz or Nakashima's father who was interned as a Japanese American here in the US. And so things like that. And we see how these large historical events affected designers through the lens of these women designers. So that for me was interesting, just given the scope of the book. I also wanted to just shout out to some of these audience posts. Christine in the chat recommended Women Designed This. So check that out as a resource. And then Paula was posting about asking if you were aware of Sarah Little Turnbull, who inspired the design of the N95 mask, development of Corningware from missile cones, and new foodstuffs from World War II, car interior spaces, and family room storage spaces. Passed away in 2015 with archives available in Seattle. So it's another woman designer. Thanks for sharing.
That's the list.
Yeah. So any final thoughts, Jane, or also tell our audience where they can follow you and your work going forward?
Yeah, well, no, it's really great to, I suppose the exact thing we want to do, right? It's like I can kind of connect you all over in the US, but don't get to see you all in this kind of format. But thanks for listening. I hope there was some interesting examples and histories and maybe gives a hint at kind of what you can find in the book. I also just want to say thanks to Phaidon, to Tessa, to everyone who's been organizing these moments and has put all the hard work into the book. I'm always like, the kind of face at the front of it, but actually the amazing pictures that you see just as a kind of beautiful object, I can't take any credit for that. They're incredible picture researchers and editors, and definitely a kind of team effort. I'm sure all of you in the design world are very aware of that, but I just want to say kind of, thanks to you and to you, Lishan, for kind of posting. It's really nice to be able to talk about the book after a year.
Yeah. Well, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for the conversation today, Jane, and also for joining us from what is evening for you. And
we're quite long.
It's seeing like the sun set on your side. But just final plug for Woman Made. You can get it on Phaidon.com. Use AIGA 20 for 20% off this book and select other books on that site. I'm Lishan Huang. Thank you all for tuning in today, and hope we will see you again at a future book event. Have a great week, everyone.